Welcome back to Inspired by Jimmy L, the reboot, where we do short and sweet, quick interviews to inspire you while encouraging myself along the way. Let's see who we have on today. Catch you on the other side.
Who are you
Who am I?
and what do you do?
Who am I and what do I do? Well, I
Hmm.
am Laurence. First of all, thank you for having me, Jimmy. But yeah, my name is Laurence. I am a stay-at-home dad. That's what I do on a day-to-day basis. I also run a podcast called Dad Dialogue where I interview other dads. I am a husband to an amazing wife who pulls me out and just makes me better and better and better each and every day. And I'm also a Christian. That's a big part of my identity. But yeah, those are the three things: Christian, father, husband. That's basically it. I do
I will say,
like fathering, dadding. That's what I do. I look after my kids all day, so
I have
it's pretty
always found it
fun.
to be fascinating how people try to group themselves into certain things. So it's funny you just said those
Mm,
are the three things. So I love it.
mm,
Freaking love it. So you brought up the podcast and interviewing other
hmm
dads. So I know that you
hmm
are a stay-at-home dad, but do you purposely go out to find other stay-at-home dads or just dads in general?
Just dads in general. I
Dads
think
in,
any dad has a story. Yeah.
that's what I thought. So that was going to be my next question for you.
Mm.
Why you? Why do you feel the need to have this conversation and with other dads?
That's a really good question. And it comes out of becoming a stay-at-home father. So my wife and I used to live in Asia. We've since moved back to Europe. We don't live in England, where we're originally from. We now then live in the Netherlands. When we made that move, I decided to become a stay-at-home dad. There's lots of reasons behind that.
Mm,
But the podcast came out of having done the stay-at-home dad thing for about 3 or 4 months, let's say. It was just isolating. Like it was really difficult to not have people to kind of talk to. Like I found some groups, I found some parents, but they weren't able to kind of fill that hole that maybe other relationships or like colleagues or the satisfaction you get from having a job and being successful at your job and kind of meeting goals and kind of hitting targets and all these sorts of things. I was loving it. I enjoyed spending so much time with my kids. I enjoyed looking after them, getting to be the primary care,
mm,
but it was just isolating. And I spoke to some dads through other dad groups, and I realized like all a good dad wants to do is ask questions. Like that's such at the forefront of their mind. If they meet other dads, they want to ask questions about what's it like to have 2 kids? What's it like to have 3 kids? What's it like when you have a big
mm,
age gap? What's it like when you have a small age gap? What's it like when you have twins? What's it like when you sadly go through the loss during miscarriage? What's like? There are all these little questions. Like I've had a guest on who's had cancer. I've had a guest on whose wife was in hospital for an
oh
extended
wow.
period of time. Like there's all these different stories that we as fathers, that thought kind of comes into my mind of like, well, yeah, what if? And like, how did you deal with it? And I don't think I don't think every dad would want to listen to every episode. I don't think they maybe would be satisfied by every episode because everyone has a different story.
Yeah, of
But
course.
I think becoming a fantastic parent and being the best for your children, you kind of have to have lots of things in your head rattling around, and that can come from reading parenting books, that can come from going to classes, that can come from kind of structured research and what have you, and specific parenting podcasts where someone is a doctor and they come to say this is how you should do
Yeah,
this and
yeah.
this. That's valuable. I'm never taking anything away from that, but it loses the humanity and the uniqueness of life, and it loses some of the heart behind what it's like to be a parent, and how we actually make decisions with the child in front of us, not the book in front of us. So that's
So
what I
so
think.
wait, you said that you felt isolated or it was isolating. Do you think that
Mm.
was only because you were a stay-at-home dad and not necessarily a mom? Is there a difference in the gender role, or is there something else behind that? Is it a parent thing in general, staying at home with the child?
I think I felt isolated because it's a me thing. I think I started to learn that about myself. I started to realize like, hey, I need more. Like I want to be doing more. I want to be achieving something. I want to be creating. I want to be making. I want to be producing and doing something. Um, So in terms of gender roles and how that kind of plays out, as a stay-at-home father, there are times that I will be in an environment where there are lots of other mums, and
Mm,
I will purposefully kind of like fade into the background because the conversations will go to very personal places that are about motherhood.
Mm,
And
gotcha.
it's not my place to comment on my wife's experience of motherhood with this group of women. So I'm very happy to kind of fade into the background and play with the kids because that's
Nice.
why a group of parents are together. And I realize that. And it's never a case of these women are trying to exclude the father. It's just a case of
Mm-hmm.
these women are being women together and they're talking about motherhood naturally. And that's what they're talking about. And it's not a conversation for me to join in on. So there are situations for sure that kind of those gender lines do get drawn. But I think it's totally healthy and natural that that happens.
I love your self awareness, like not just as a parent, but just as a person. I love your self awareness to be able to to say, let me take a step back in this
Mm,
conversation. Let me not speak up for my wife, or even to say, I don't think that it's an isolating thing for parents. I felt isolated in this moment, so I
mm,
really appreciate you bringing it home for me, and which kind of brings me back to my next question for you in regards to
mm-hmm,
authenticity. So when
mm,
you are working, when you are creating, when you are putting out this version of you, is what I think. This version of you, of
mm.
being a parent, having these conversations with other dads. That version of you, is it the same version of you when you're in your personal space and at home with your kids? Like, is it the same authentic version?
That's a really good question.
Of
I
course it
think
is, Lawrence.
I think one of the main things. So I often think back. This is it's a bit of a tangent, but just go with me for a minute. I'll try
Go
and keep
ahead,
it
go. You
brief.
got it.
I often think back to my high school time in secondary school. So it's, as a teenager, I often think back to it, and I didn't really have many really close friends. I would float around between friend groups and would fit in with all these different friend groups and would be a part of all the jokes. I would like
Mhm.
they wouldn't be including me just because they wanted to include me. I was genuinely parts of these friends groups, but then I would never be invited to like to one-on-one like hangouts after school with like one kid because I was never really like super close with any of these one kids. I was always this like chameleon that would kind of like adjust to what the situation needed. And I
Yeah.
find myself within the podcast space of interviewing other people, that is necessary at times in terms of what another person's values are to kind of make sure they're being heard, make sure that the values are being questioned authentically, like we're talking about. I think there's obviously a very different face of being a parent to a currently they're 2 and 3, like the 3-year-old will turn 4 very soon. So obviously being a parent to those kids looks very different than communicating with an adult, but like
Okay.
my values are always the same, and if I feel like it's necessary for me to bring them up, I will always bring them up. And but yeah, it always comes from a place of authenticity, and that's maybe just part of my life is kind of like floating around a little bit and kind of getting being a social comedian. Like I really enjoy talking to other mums. Like obviously as a stay-at-home dad, I get into these situations of talking to other mums. I enjoy it, but it doesn't fulfill me in the same way of talking to other dads. So that's partly where the podcast comes from as well, if that makes sense. So
It
yeah,
does.
like authenticity for sure, but also like flexibility to ensure that a guest is being valued in the proper way.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. So, okay. So, going back to your guests, what has
Hmm.
probably been the biggest lesson, the biggest tip that you have received thus far from one of your guests on parenting?
Oh, so many, so
I
many.
know. That's why I said just one, not the biggest, just one. One of.
I think maybe not tips of the like parenting tips. They kind of get locked in a drawer and they only come out when they're relevant. So they can be
Okay.
hard to pull on without it
Okay.
being actually relevant. But I think the overarching theme that has been so important from multiple conversations is the relationship with my wife as being the primary thing to put the effort and intentionality into to create a healthy family. I think I'm a better dad when my marriage is flourishing. I think my wife is a better mother when our marriage is flourishing. And I've spoken to quite a few dads. The one that stands out was a grandfather who had been through quite a lot, like lived in different places. He had actually been through some marriage like troubles, which we went into a little bit. But
Hmm.
he was always so intentional about his marriage first and foremost, even before the kids. And that doesn't mean you spend more time on a marriage, because obviously, like if I'm looking after the kids, I'm spending more time on them. but it just means in terms of how we prioritize our way of thinking and how we kind of think about being intentional with relationships, we're ensuring that marriage is first and foremost being looked after.
Nice. I love that. I love it. It seems like you're so open to the idea or the possibilities that there isn't just one way of being a parent or being a father, being a mother, or even obviously the parent, the two parent household. Let me say that. Like obviously there is not one way to run your household, and I freaking love that. It's been my experience as well that one of the biggest teachers that has ever come along is most likely our children. Not that I have any, don't have
Mm.
any yet, but children. So, what has probably been one of the biggest lessons that your children have taught you so far?
Oh man, it's you have to be so aware. Like they're like a mirror, especially when you're a stay-at-home parent. Excuse me. Not
Mm,
everyone's going to be a stay-at-home parent, of
yeah.
course,
Hmm.
but they do hold up a mirror to you. Excuse me. If you react in a certain way, they start doing that same thing. If you say a certain thing, they'll start doing that same thing. So you just have to be so aware of what you say and what you do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Gotcha. Okay, so another question for you then. The life that you are currently living, how you are currently parenting, how you're putting out this information out there with more dads. Is this a life that you dreamt of? Is it a life that you manifested? Is it a life that you prayed for, or did all this stuff just kind of happen?
um, my wife and I definitely spoken about it at some point,
Okay.
but never really to the extent now. I think I've always been a producer at heart. I've always been someone that's looking to make stuff, whether that be music or videos or podcasts, whatever it may be.
Mhm.
So I guess it kind of makes sense, but the details is the thing that you don't really know what it's going to look like. Like we never knew we'd live in the Netherlands. We've lived in 3 different countries now.
Gotcha.
But when we moved to our first one, we didn't know we'd go to the second one. When we moved there, we didn't know we'd come here. Like we're very open people in terms of how we run our lives. And when we still look forward, we still think about what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years. We have a vision board, which is like what we think our life will look like at some point, and just certain like key things, certain pictures in terms of
Mhm.
how we interact with our children. And this was before we had kids.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
How our marriage looks, what our kind of hobbies are doing, like what sort of things we want to see ourselves like in areas we should be leading. And some of the things are coming to fruition. And one of them was like also having a big house and welcoming lots of people around. We live in a tiny apartment. Well, not tiny, but like a small apartment for a family of 4, which we're renting. So that hasn't happened yet. We're still praying for that house eventually. But it's a very
Got,
good question. I haven't really thought about that.
I was going to ask you that as well. The things that are currently on your vision board or was previously on the vision board, has everything come to pass? And you literally just answered that for me.
I mean,
So,
one of them is a really old picture of an old couple, like together with a big heart,
oh,
like a cartoon picture of like this like old white guy and this old black woman because my wife is
uh,
black. So it's like
okay.
cartoon picture of that we found, and it's like, oh, this is perfect. This is like with a big heart. So like that will come true,
Yeah,
hopefully. Like as long
absolutely.
as we live a long
I
time.
love, I love, I love it. I love it. So, okay, I got one more question to ask you before we go ahead and wrap this up. But before I get there, like, how can people find you? How can people continue to be inspired by you, Mr. Lawrence?
I appreciate it. Yeah, just Instagram. It's just Dad Dialogue at Dad Dialogue. The podcast is on all the major platforms and YouTube. And also daddialogue.co.uk. I'm always looking for other dads to come on. You can just go there and fill out a form. Love to hear from more people. And yeah, come up, send me a message. Let's engage. I love it.
Awesome, awesome. So, my final question for you, of course, I love positivity, love inspiration.
Hmm.
What has inspired you today?
Today. Today.
Hmm.
So I'm editing my next episode, and
Okay.
so this chap, he just trying to remember. You actually touched on it yourself somehow earlier, but just a reminder that parents approach things differently. and like that's okay, and it doesn't mean that someone's being a bad parent. Because I myself really have to check myself when someone's out in public and a kid's going crazy, whatever. So here, going
That
back
never
and
happens.
editing.
That never happens,
Oh no,
right?
of course not. Oh, it happened today because so it's taken me a long time. So it happened for me, for my kid, basically. It's taken me a
Mhm.
long time to kind of get over myself if I'm on public transport and one of my kids is like causing a ruckus or screaming or crying, whatever. Quite a long time, I would feel so self-conscious that everyone's looking at me, and I'd like get off early and run away. Now I'm at the point where it's just a kid crying. It's not going to ruin your day. It's not going to like be that bad. So that happened today. My son was like quite upset about something. Fine, whatever. We kind of moved on. But that reminded me that so the guy that I'll be publishing tomorrow, he was saying that every parent is different, and you really do have to remind yourself that of when you're seeing other parents dealing with situations, they are going to deal with things differently. And the minute that you, or the second that you think of any sort of judgment, you're just affecting yourself negatively. Like there's nothing
Mhm.
positive about you thinking, oh, I would have done this differently. Like what? Like that thought doesn't need to happen. Kids are different, people's lives are different, parents are different. You just need to approach things with some love and some grace, and maybe just smile at the person and like just say you're doing a good job or whatever. Like you can just think about how you could be positive in that situation, and that was a really important reminder. Going back and editing that episode.
I love that. That is the perfect place to end this episode. Lawrence, thank you so very much for coming on and
You're
saying
welcome.
yes.
I appreciate it.
Everybody else,
Thanks so
we
much
will
for the
be
time.
seeing you on the next one. See you guys.
Peace.